The clock on the mantelpiece ticked with heavy indifference that seemed to mock the stillness of the house. For Elena, time hadn't moved since the Tuesday 6 months ago when her world shattered into 1,000 pieces. Julian was gone, taken by a twisted wreckage of metal on a slick highway. Since that day, her life had become a series of shadows and tasteless meals. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the spines of his favorite books and breathing in the fading scent of his cologne from a closet she couldn't bring herself to clear. The silence was an entity, thick and suffocating until the very morning the first delivery arrived. It felt as though the air had solidified, trapping her in a perpetual state of mourning for a man who would never walk through the door again. Or at 8 a.m., on the 6-month anniversary of the crash, a sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. On the porch sat a vase filled with white lilies, Julian's favorite. They were waxy, their petals dusted with a delicate fragrance that felt out of place in her house of sorrow. Tucked between the stems was a card. Elena's breath hitched as she read the familiar script, "I never truly left." Her hands began to tremble so violently that the lilies nearly spilled onto the porch. It was impossible. It was cruel. Yet the handwriting wasn't just a mimicry. It had the specific way Julian looped his L's and the slight smudge he always left with his thumb. The next morning, the bell rang again at the same hour. Another bouquet, another note. This one referenced a private joke about a burnt anniversary dinner. "Remember the charcoal chicken?" "I'm still sorry," it read. Day after day, the ritual continued with haunting precision. Lilies, roses, and sunflowers began to fill her kitchen, turning the empty house into a fragrant mausoleum of living memories. Elena's terror began to melt into a frantic hope. The notes grew more intimate, mentioning how she took her coffee or how she hummed when she was nervous. She stopped sleeping, her eyes fixed on the driveway, wondering if Julian had somehow faked his death. Maybe the accident was a ruse, a desperate escape she didn't understand. Driven by obsession, Elena drove to the local florist whose name was on the wrapping. Inside, the shop was humid and sweet, but Elena felt only cold dread. She confronted the clerk, who looked at her with pity. Elena demanded to know who was paying for the daily deliveries. The clerk checked her computer with a frown. She explained that the orders were placed through an encrypted online portal and paid in full via an untraceable account. There was no name, no address, just a schedule that stretched out into the future. Frustrated, Elena returned home to find the day's delivery waiting. As she reached for the stems, a glossy Polaroid fell from the leaves. Her heart stopped. It was a shot of Elena herself, curled up on the garden bench, fast asleep yesterday. Someone had been standing in her garden watching her breathe, capturing her in a silent click. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elena rushed to her laptop, her fingers fumbling as she accessed the cloud storage system for her front porch security camera. She scrolled quickly through the footage from the previous night, her pulse thundering in her ears like a drum. At 3:14 a.m., a tall figure emerged from the long, reaching shadows of the oak tree. The person moved with a distinctive rhythmic gait, a slight hitch Julian had developed years ago. The figure was wearing a worn-out brown leather jacket, the very one Julian wore the night he died. Elena's scream died in her throat as the man looked directly toward the lens, his face obscured by the darkness, yet his presence feeling undeniably like the husband who was supposed to be buried deep 6 feet under. The morning air at the local cemetery was biting and sharp, a stark contrast to the suffocatingly sweet warmth of the house Elena had left behind. She stood before the polished granite headstone, her fingers tracing the deeply engraved name of the man she had loved. 6 months of rain and wind had already begun to dull the sharp edges of the letters, yet the memory of the figure on the security tape remained as vivid as a fresh wound. She stared at the manicured grass, a terrifying thought taking root in her grief. Was Julian truly resting beneath the earth, or was the casket as empty as her own life? The security footage played on a relentless loop, the specific hitch in the man's stride, the worn leather of the jacket. Her sanity felt like a fraying rope, stretched between the physical reality of the grave and the ghostly evidence that appeared on her porch with the rising sun. Every instinct screamed he was alive, yet the cold stone whispered of finality. When she returned home, a new bouquet was already waiting, but the serene white of the lilies had been replaced by a deep crimson explosion of roses. These were not symbols of romance. They were the silent roses, a private code they had shared to signify a secret that must never be spoken. Her heart hammered with a frantic rhythm as she unfolded the small card. The handwriting was hurried, the ink slightly smeared as if the writer were agitated. The note warned her with chilling brevity, "Don't look for me, or they will find you too." The desperate hope of a reunion curdled into a cold, sharp dread. This was no longer a message from the beyond. It was a plea for her to stop before she crossed the line of no return. Confused, Elena began scouring through Julian's digital records. She pulled up his life insurance policy, expecting to find the paperwork she had already processed. Instead, thus she discovered a discrepancy that chilled her. While her primary claim had been settled, there was a secondary, much larger policy that remained untouched. The beneficiary wasn't her. It was an anonymous trust identified only by a cryptic string of alphanumeric characters. Julian had been hiding an entire financial existence, a layer of preparation that suggested he hadn't just died in a random accident. He had been bracing for a massive impact long before he ever hit the road on that rainy Tuesday. The feeling of being watched intensified. Every time Elena stepped onto her porch to retrieve the morning's delivery, she noticed a sleek black sedan parked at the far end of the street. Its engine idled silently, a predatory shadow sitting just beyond the reach of the streetlights. It never moved, never approached, and never stayed once she retreated inside. It was a dark sentinel, a constant reminder that she was being hunted by something far more dangerous than a ghost. The corporate world Julian once inhabited seemed to be closing its grip around her. Sleep became an impossible luxury. Elena spent the next night huddled by the window, her eyes fixed on the driveway. When a courier arrived at dawn, she lunged onto the porch. "Who is paying for these?" she demanded, her voice cracked with exhaustion. The boy stammered, explaining he followed orders from a hub. Elena snatched his tablet, scrolling through the history. Her breath left her in a sharp gasp. The orders weren't placed daily. The system showed a massive contract paid in full 3 years ago. Julian had scheduled these flowers and notes years before the accident. Say he had known his time was short long before he died. Julian had planned his own haunting from the very distant past. As the boy fled, Elena found a key to a safe deposit box hidden inside the flower box beneath the wet foam, alongside a cryptic bank address that held the final answers to her late husband's secrets. Elena stood before the heavy steel door of the safe deposit vault, the brass key feeling like a frozen ember in her palm. The bank's basement was silent, smelling of old paper and chilled ozone, a subterranean world of secrets. When the clerk finally withdrew, leaving her in the sterile viewing room, Elena's breath hitched. She slid the drawer open, finding a silver USB drive resting atop a sheaf of legal documents. Her hands trembled as she opened her laptop, the screen's blue glow casting ghostly shadows against the cold, gray walls. A file titled "For My Elena" appeared. When she clicked play, Julian's face filled the frame, illuminated by a harsh desk lamp. He looked exhausted, his eyes carrying a weight she hadn't understood. "If you are watching this, the flowers have served their purpose," he began, his voice a hauntingly familiar rasp. He explained his discovery of a systematic cover-up of toxic waste dumping by his corporation. They had been poisoning the local water table for years, and Julian was the only one who had documented the trail of bribes and corporate reports. The accident had been a certainty he foresaw. Julian revealed he spent his final weeks building a fortress around her. The daily flowers were never a romantic gesture. They were a meticulously timed distraction and a guide. He scheduled them to keep her focused, to provide comfort, and eventually to lead her to this box when the corporate eyes watching her finally blinked. He had turned his own memory into a breadcrumb trail, ensuring his death was not in vain and that she had the resources to survive the fallout of his whistleblowing. Elena returned home to gather her things, the USB drive tucked in her pocket, when the familiar hum of the black sedan grew louder. This time, they didn't wait. The front door splintered as 2 men in dark suits forced their way into the foyer. They moved with clinical, predatory grace, eyes fixed on the documents she held. Elena retreated toward the kitchen, her heart thundering against her ribs. She felt the cold marble countertop against her back, the terrifying realization dawning that the corporation's reach was as long as Julian had feared. Just as the lead man reached for her, the kitchen's glass door exploded inward. It wasn't another attacker, but the young courier she had once confronted. His shy demeanor was gone, replaced by the lethal energy of a trained operative. Behind him, figures in tactical gear swarmed the room. In a blur of movement, the hitmen were neutralized and pinned. The courier looked at Elena and offered a nod. He explained Julian's secondary insurance policy had retained a private security firm to protect her until the evidence was delivered to the authorities. The flowers were the signal. As long as deliveries continued, the security team remained in the shadows, watching for the corporation's move. Julian had hired a ghost army to guard his widow from beyond the grave. In the weeks that followed, the Julian's evidence tore through the corporate hierarchy like a wildfire, leading to arrests that dominated the national headlines. The black sedan disappeared, and the weight of being hunted finally lifted. Elena was finally free of the shadows, her husband's last mission complete, leaving her with a legacy of truth and safety. 1 year after the accident, a final bouquet arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. It was a single white lily. The note was written in Julian's unmistakable script, "Now you are safe. Live for both of us." Elena walked into her garden, the sun warming her skin. She realized Julian's love was a shield that functioned even from the silence of the earth. As she knelt by the flower bed, she saw a single lily blooming, a testament to a new beginning. She stood in the sunrise, finally at peace, a survivor in his light. Every petal that swayed in the morning breeze felt like a soft whisper of a forever promise kept today.